purification requires heat and pressure. And so you have a container and it gets hot. And that's when you want to leave. That's when the changes can take place. And sometimes they have to be radical to maintain the relationship. Very radical, but hopefully those radical changes are positive. But what makes you think you'd make them if there wasn't a fire lit under you? And one of the fires is, I can't escape from you. Here we are, locked in combat, right? Here, official adversary, yeah. There's no out except through. And there's no evidence that through will work. And so that's part of the utility of the vow, is to turn the temperature up. And you could say, well, I'll escape. But the problem with that is, escape to where? You're not going to have another relationship? And if to the degree that you brought the catastrophe to the previous relationship, which is at least a 50-50 probability, right? What makes you think you're not going to bring it to the new? Yeah. I've had many bad relationships. Like, really? I've never met anyone I can trust. Okay. Everyone's motivated by power. What's the common denominator here? Exactly. So, it's tricky because lots of people in my family have been divorced, which is the case in virtually every family, and I don't feel like I'm in a position to shake my finger at people and say, you failed, and with more effort you could have succeeded. That's not up to me to decide. And many of those people have gone on to have more successful relationships the second time around. But that doesn't belie the initial point. And besides, even the people who went through a divorce wanted to get married again, they still see utility in the vow and the container. So, you can't make these things into inviolable absolutes. 0 divorce, 0 drugs, 0 climate change. No, that isn't how the world works. Partly because there's always the snake in the garden, right? There's no 0. Not without the application of increasingly totalitarian force. There has to be some leeway, but you don't blow the whole systems apart just to provide some leeway. It's a very difficult thing to negotiate. I've had clients who had partners that really couldn't be negotiated with. The whole idea of negotiation wasn't negotiable. And I didn't see they really had any choice to either maintain the millstone around their neck and drown, or to leave. It's an awful choice, but that doesn't mean that marriage is a prison that no one should ever enter. It just means that things are complicated. 0 is not the right cost. Now, what the right cost is, that's really tricky. Well, that's why you have markets, is to determine what the right cost is. 0, it's like we've sold way more of these than we would have ever given away. Partly because people presume that if it costs nothing, it's worth nothing. And partly because it isn't free. Like, we actually worked, well, one of my partners worked pretty much full time for 15 years on this at subpar wages, making 1/10 of perhaps of what he could have made in the private domain, like if he would have gone out and marketed his skills, because he's a brilliant programmer. He has a PhD in psychology, extraordinarily educated, unbelievably accomplished. He could have made a fortune in other private endeavors. He worked at subpar wages for 15 years before we had any success on this front at all. So it wasn't free by any stretch of the imagination. It was unbelievably expensive for us to do this. And so then to say pillory it, because somebody might say, well, if you were really interested in the welfare of the human race, you wouldn't be making money off your redemptive endeavors. It's like, what do you know about it? Exactly. Have you ever tried to build something and market it? Do you have any idea what that entails? Yeah, first of all, have you built something that works, that's scalable, that would help? You've demonstrated that it worked. You've done all that. And that's like, you're 5% of the way there, buddy, because you think now you've got a good thing that people will line up to use it. 95% of the problem is marketing and communication. Have you ever tried to communicate about a product that you've built? No? And you're telling me that somehow I'm malevolent because I'm trying to make enough money off this to justify its existence, to make sure that I've designed it in a way that people actually want. You can tell that because they'll pay for it. in a way that will sustain it and allow it to grow while simultaneously trying to reward the people that developed it. That's all wrong, is it? And you know that. So, no, I have a set of empty-headed axioms about inequality, and I'm judging you morally because of their, injudicious application, because that's easier than thinking.
If you love someone, you simultaneously love and accept their fragility. And that means that in some way you actually think it's justifiable. That's what I thought about my son. It's like, no, I think he's fine just the way he is. Like 3 years old, got his problems, certainly gets hurt a fair bit and is probably going to get hurt more, but I'm not trading him in. I like him just the way he is. And so that's it's a realization of the soul that there's something about the fragility of human life that's actually valuable. And it is the limitation. That's the thing that's so cool about it, is that it's this limitation that we are, because that's what we are, is we're limitation. We're potential conjoined with limitation in some sense. Think, well, we want to get rid of the limitation, but it's not the case. We have to keep the limitation because it's integral to who we are. And so we're in this situation where we have to be limited, and we have to accept it, and we have to confront what's essentially an infinite potential to help us manage it. And I think that that's true. And I think that's how we act. I think it's what we expect. I think it's what we need to know. Because you have to say, and that's part of standing up straight, right? And accepting the tragedy and catastrophe of existence. This is partly why I think the West got it right. Because I do think we got it right. The central story, we're a Judeo-Christian culture, and there's a central story at the bottom, and the story is about the radical acceptance of fragility. That's what the crucifixion represents. The fact that that's a voluntary act. And it's about everybody. That's the thing. It's about everybody. It's that, well, you're going to die. You're going to be betrayed. Those are going to happen. And so you can either shrink from that and maybe envelop yourself in bitterness and hatred. And no wonder, no wonder. Or you can say, bring it on. Bring it on.